Lawrence James. Hopefully some of y'all still remember me from way back in the day. That used to be my role 40 years ago, to shout and yell and bring people's attention to the events. So hopefully I haven't lost my voice. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for coming. It's amazing to me to stand here and see all of you. Tony Berg! Oh my God! What's up, bro? Sorry, digression. I was always good for that too. It is amazing to see all of you, and I think it's a reflection of just what this movement meant to each of us, that you would take time to fly, to drive, to come here, and to participate in something that was a little pipe dream that Sia and I had on a call, BSing around, whatever, and we were like, oh my God, it's gonna be 40 years this spring. He's like, it'd be really cool to see people and see what their lives have become. And that this has happened, honestly, God is really amazing. So, cheers. I'd like to thank this committee for coming together to put this event together. Sia Lindstrom, Lisa Dixon, Susan Lacy-Ryan, and Jeff Machota. On a whim, I called and they all responded. And some of you weren't called because I ain't got your number and I ain't talked to you in 4 years, so sorry. But as soon as we had the idea, they were all like, yes, let's do this. And I will say, while it may have started with my call, the lion's share of the work that was done to put this together was not me. It was particularly Jeff and Susan. Susan's, by the way, the best stalker ever. If you want to find somebody, call Susan, because she got some magic bullets out there. But I can't thank you all enough for what you have done to help bring this event to the forefront. So I'm particularly appreciative of that. If we could, I would love to just take a moment of silence, not only for President Mandela and his wife and all the freedom fighters in South Africa, but for some of our brothers and sisters who were in this fight, who have also passed away, many in the last few years. So if you could bow your heads for just a moment. Thank you. We got a program that hopefully will bring some really cool memories, but also bring us up to date on what's happened in the intervening 40 years. Because lots of things have happened. Obviously, South Africa is not the shithole that somebody might say that it is, but it's a nation that continues to build. And while there is black majority rule, there still is a kind of apartheid that exists in South Africa, especially for any of you who may have been there, as I was in the last couple of years. So it'd be great to learn more about that history. So we're going to first have my brother Jeff is going to come and talk a little bit about the history of the movement here on campus. And then Professor Barnes, who's here, who has graciously agreed to be here, who's a professor of African history here at the university, and an expert in the history of South Africa, amongst other things. And so she's going to talk to us about the history of the movement. And then we've got a couple of questions for this group that we'll be answering. And obviously, then we're going to Q&A, and we would love to hear from as many and all of you. And before I forget, because Jeff's going to kill me, please, in the back, we've got a bunch of photos. And we don't know everybody who's in the photos. So if y'all could take a look, and if you remember somebody, remember a name, please jot their name on the photos so that we can make sure that we're able to remember all of our brothers and sisters who were in the struggle. Also, in the back, when you signed up, there was a spot for any of you who wanted to be a part of the archive. Jeff's going to be conducting some interviews with as many of you who would like to speak to what your experiences were being a part of this movement as well. All right. So without any further ado, I'm sit down and shut up. Sterling will be going, why are you still talking? Jeff Machota.
Hello, everybody. So I'm just going to do a brief overview of a little bit of the history, but mostly the history of what happened here at the U of I 40 years ago. But to start with, for those of you who don't remember or don't know, so 1940, we're going to hear more in-depth stuff from the professor here in a few minutes. But apartheid was established in 1948, a system of racial and political white minority rule. 1960s, the divestment started as a movement for businesses that did their business in South Africa. And it's called for by those advocating for the overthrow of apartheid. 1977, here at the U of I, was the formation of the Champaign-Urbana Coalition Against Apartheid, KUKA, for some of you who know. And they were part of the wave of divestment stuff that was happening across the country. They did some sit-ins, and they did a sit-in at the university president's office, who of course refused to debate the issue. 1983, the Coalition for Illinois Divestment from South Africa, SIDSA, was formed. And those of you who might know or remember Prexy Nesbitt, he was one of the founders and movers of that. And they worked with KUKA here locally. Then, in the spring of 1985, there was a progressive student government slate here called Off Center. Off Center won a majority of seats and got SGA to pass a resolution supporting divestment. And then the first rally of that era happened in April of 1985. The Divest Now Coalition was formed at that point, right around that time, as part of the Coalition Against Apartheid, but for us to be single issue and focus on divestment. In June 1985, the U of I board once again defeated motions by trustee Al Logan for divestment. 16 campus and community members from UI, UC, and UIC were arrested after the vote. I was one of them. $21 million of the school's $131 million were invested in companies with holdings in South Africa. So that's what we were fighting for, divestment of the $21 million. 1986, so things started to pick up in 86. And contextually, if you look at some of the stuff back there, things were happening in South Africa. For those of you who don't remember, it was in the newspaper all the time. All the atrocities that were happening in South Africa was on the news, and the protests across the country were happening all the time too. So we were caught up in the wave of that. We had decided that the April Board of Trustees meeting, which was right here, right in this spot, that we were going to be targeting that space. And so I was reading the DI archives recently, and we were in the paper all the time. We were upping the ante. We said we weren't going to, no business as usual. We were getting ready to do a lot of stuff and target the Board of Trustees meeting. April 4th, we had a rally on the Quad, part of the National Day of Action. April 7th, Prexy Nesbitt spoke here. April 8th, we had our first shantytown with no permit at first, an agreement. April 9th, we had a rally on the Quad, which was the biggest rally since Kent State in 1970. And something around with that. 1,000+ people, and back then Kent State seemed really far from what we were doing, and now that was only 16. We're way farther from what happened in 1986 than we were from that. Our plan at that point was, because the board was going to be meeting here the next day, that we were going to take over the South Lounge of the Union and press the issue, and we were ready to get arrested. As Sia remembered last night, some people had Brian Savage's phone number written on their hand, and we were ready for when the arrest might happen.
Our lawyer.
Our lawyer. Not just a call, yes.
Oh, right, yeah.
And then what happened is that the board, or the U of I, chose not to arrest us. So we were taken aback, we weren't sure what to do. So people in the Performers Workshop Ensemble helped organize some teach-ins impromptu, while others of us were trying to figure out what to do the next day. So the next day, April 10th, we shut down the board. We had, first off, 16 people in here who demanded the board divest. They got arrested. Then we worked out a negotiation where we sent 3 more people in and said, yeah, they won't disrupt. They did. They got arrested. And then they the board meeting officially shut down. And then they went through we had hundreds of people in the hallway. then a lot of people sat down and 41 more people got arrested there. So, and all of this was like in a week and a half. So those of you who say, hey Jeff, how come you never graduated from the U of I? There you go, there's the answer. After that, April 12th, hundreds of us engaged in guerrilla theater to take down the first shantytown. Right when Chancellor Everhard was going to deliver his speech on the quad, a few hundred of us tore it down, acted like we had been killed by the South African police. And then that was the photo op. He came out and didn't change 1 inch of his speech. He said, thank you for coming today. And that.
Cool then.
Then a week later, we had a funeral march to the quad where we took the wood from the coffins, formed a second shantytown with no permit. That lasted only 24 hours before the U of I tore it down. Then once again, on May 1st, I remember Brian and especially Harvey working with us as we were negotiating with the university administrators to get permits. And we got a permit from May 1st through 4th. We had another shantytown for 2 weeks, which had to be mobile. We had to move it for 3 events. We didn't have it for all, but we did. Then May 12th, 50 to 100 frat guys attacked the shantytown, tore down one, kicked in another, sprayed the 5 occupiers with fire extinguishers and buckets of water, and they were chanting, "Invest now." That didn't stop us. We had it going for a few more days. And then I'll wrap this up with, we had a legal defense fund. We had to raise $15,000 to pay our overpriced lawyers. We had 6 lawyers come forward. And I was crunching some numbers, that's like $45,000 in today's money. But we raised it all, and we'll talk more about some of the arrests later. But the fall of '86, the pressure was kept on. Finally, in January of '87, while the students were away, the board had the final vote. They passed a resolution. It began an 18-month period of divestment on May 31st. That was set by Reverend Leon Sullivan. It was the Sullivan Principles. The victory was short of our original goal. The board only divested $3.3 million due to some shenanigans with fake disinvestment, but we still had a victory. And if you look at from the beginning of when KUKA was formed till then, it was only 10 years. Back when we were 20 and 21 and 22, that was a lifetime. We weren't ready to wait that long. But so that's just a thumbnail of what got us to the point we are and what brought us here today.
Thank you, Jeff. Professor Barnes, why don't you take us through, so what's happened in the last 40 years?
That's later.
Is that later?
That's later. That's the second part. No,
You know, we be flexible in this whole thing.
she has 2 spots. One is later.
So in the DNC you learned how to organize events, right?
What did I tell you? I was the MC. I take care of none of this. I just call the people.
Okay.
That's what I'm doing.
And
Professor Barnes.
All right, well, so I'm Terry Barnes. I'm a professor of history and gender and women's studies here at the U of I, and thank you so much to you all for reaching out to me. I'm really honored to be here, Susan and your committee. First, I want to, thank you all for coming, but I also want to salute those of you who took the risk to do what you thought was right back then. You are regularly rediscovered and remembered, and your example has been followed by generations of student activists, and they are proud of you. So thank you. Susan asked, in the history department, we have a course that I refused to teach because I said, this is like teaching from Olduvai Gorge to Nelson Mandela in 16 weeks, and I said, I'm not doing it. So this is a little bit like that, but anyway. But Susan asked me to say something about apartheid South Africa, which you all were working, doing your best to work against. So then and now. This is about apartheid South Africa. My family and I lived in South Africa from 91 to 98. We loved it there, and we still miss it today. We're now all used to speaking in euphemisms and veiled terms about racism, but for the sake of historical accuracy, I'm not going to do that. So I want to tell you what, maybe I can take you into sort of what apartheid South Africa was actually all about. And the best analogy that I've come up with is that in South Africa, poison was poured into the soil for 350 years. That poison was the idea of the legitimacy of racial hierarchy. The useful timeline that, well, Susan sent me a timeline, and you read part of it, Jeff, but it was much longer, actually. A timeline gives us a good framework, but let's think about, what does racial hierarchy really mean in daily life? It means convincing people that first, race is real, that white people are good and deserving humans, while black people are basically only livestock to be used and managed. And how did the South Africans do that? Well, for 350 years they taught, for example, in religion, they taught that white people have been chosen by God. In economics, they taught that you can ensure that no white person is ever supervised by or told what to do by a black person. In education, you forbid the teaching of the idea of equality. Equality is the enemy. In politics, you teach that black people don't have the capacity to understand political representation, they don't deserve it, and they will never get it, not here and not now. As far as sex is concerned, racial mixing is anathema, so white people and black people mustn't love each other. In neighborhoods, all black people are dangerous and untrustworthy, and they want to attack white people. Black people do not have to live in family structures. They just need the conditions to reproduce. Sheds, like chickens. How was all of this institutionalized? It was institutionalized in the pass laws, the land laws, the Population Registration Act, Bantu Education, the Group Areas Act, the so-called Immorality Acts, the suppression of communism laws, a militarized state complete with secret death squads and internal spies. The desired result of all of this was people recognizing that it's the right of the strong to dominate the weak. A white supremacist state it was the desired result, where whites are given preferential access to resources and services, and white people are protected from having to compete with black people in any way. And white interests are defended by the police and military with overwhelming firepower. So that was the desired result. The actual result didn't always live up to those so-called ideals, but what did take root were deep convictions of white entitlement and black inferiority. But 350 years is also long enough to develop traditions of resistance that get to the realization that Steve Biko arrived at. For example, we want to kill not the white man, but the idea that whiteness is superior and blackness is inferior. Also, it's time enough to develop the realization that justice is a collective, not an individual struggle, and that it requires the building of political bridges, networks, and broad coalitions, requiring good structures of leadership accountability. So, here in the U.S., just to link up with what Jeff is saying, here in the U.S., by August 1988, 155 universities had at least partially divested from South Africa. Along with many other efforts, divestment helped push along the movement that led to the passing here in the U.S. of the 1986 Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act by the U.S. Congress and increased public awareness about South African institutionalized racism. By the end of the 80s, 90 cities, 22 counties, and 26 states had taken some form of economic stance against the South African government. Over 200 U.S. companies cut all ties with South Africa from 1985 to 1990, resulting in a loss of $1 billion in direct American investment. And in that atmosphere, businesses, investors, and money left South Africa. Its currency was significantly devalued, and inflation reached double digits. I think you all know the political chronology after that. So this sort of takes us up to the first election in 1994, and that's where I'm going to stop my part one and hand it over to our next speaker.
I must say there's an interesting connection for me as I listen to you. When you talk about the 350 years. In the U.S., there's a similar chronology, and that doesn't escape me. Puritan principles in this country have clearly disenfranchised black, brown, and anybody else, but also have created the sense of what it means to be American, which is sort of antithetical to things like community and collaboration. And many things that African communities throughout the world have, as well as other indigenous communities, have proselytized for. So it's an interesting parallel. And we, I think for me at least, 40 years ago, I was thinking about this as an issue or a problem in South Africa. This was my way, because I was too young for the civil rights movement. This was my way to be in the fight. And it was not clear to me then, as it is now, how much of a parallel there was with the African American struggle and the indoctrination into what it means to be American. There was, so I appreciate you distilling that for us, and for me in particular. So thank you. We will have time for questions, but if y'all can bear with us, we're gonna move with some pace. So this panel of DNC warriors, we have some questions, hopefully that will talk not only about their own individual experiences in being a part of the DNC, but what it's kind of meant for them in terms of then and now their lives. And so we've got some questions that we're going to go through, and I hope for all of you who are sitting in the audience that it'll perk some thinking for yourselves about your own personal journeys, and hopefully as we continue to have time to talk in Q&A as well as later on this evening, you'll be willing to share some of your own stories and your own journeys through this time period as well. So our first question for the panel is, what brought you to the DNC? How and why did you get involved in the anti-apartheid movement while you were in college or while you were at the university? Ms. Dixon. I'm sorry, you. That felt like it felt like it.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, it did. I think there's a song.
Miss Jackson.
Miss Jackson.
So I believe I was a senior at that point, and I had been living in Allen Hall, and I had been, I was a student of anthropology. But one of the things I want to do is, Sia and I were both anthropology students, and one thing I want to say is that the anthropology department at that time was wonderfully subversive in a lot of ways, and one of our rallying cries for DNC was bring wood. We were going to build the shanties, and they lent us their university cars to carry wood in the dead of night to do that. But one of the things is I was a program advisor and got involved in the DNC, and was then at that point, because you get to have your room and board paid for, was told that I needed to move out of Allen Hall because I was involved in this, and I think it was after and that's how I ended up being your because I needed somewhere to live. So I got involved in it partly because as you remember, we talked a little bit about being a little too young for some of the civil rights movement, but my mom was always a member of it. We were always connected to it, however tangentially, here in Champaign. And so I was aware on some level of the injustices in the world, and then also being a black woman in the world, I was aware of them. So I was already leaning towards those things, and then I was friends with Jeff, friends with Susan, friends with a lot of people, and started attending the KUKA/DNC meetings, and we were an RSO, if I recall, a registered student organization. Yes. And then part of what I think brought me there was I sort of found my community, because it was people who were intelligent, but who were also fun. that we went to, part of the way the first shanty got built was because I believe you, Sterling, you, Carrie, we were in Trinos and we had a few beers. And
Oh, see, it's coming out now.
around 10:30 at night, built and carried a shanty town across from Trinos, from somebody's backyard, and placed it in front of Fulling Drive. So, the card parties, the spades parties, the parties that started Friday afternoon and ended Sunday evening, all of this, of course, we're 19, 20, 21, so you felt alive. And I felt alive, and I felt like I was able, in my small way, to make a contribution to something that was larger than myself. And I found that later on in my life, but definitely this is the beginning of those seeds for me, the DNC, was that I was able to meet up, hang out, and have a community of people who cared and were passionate about the world, and were also passionate about our lives and how we could make a contribution to the world. And I remember driving to Springfield to meetings. Somehow we got, I don't know how I ended up becoming a spokesperson at the time. Maybe because I talked good. It ended up being, led me to a life in theater. But that community, I think, also made me just want to fight harder. Because the community we had, which was people of many races, we also recognized was something that we were privileged to be able to experience here. And I also learned that one wants to fight with people and not for people, not, make sure I'm doing that right, I learned very much how to be an ally and how to be a support system and structure and not be a condescending sort of top-down kind of thing. That's one of the things I learned through our meetings and workshops and all that stuff. So, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. Sia. What brought you?
Yeah, what brought me here? It's interesting, both Lisa and I were townies, right? So we went to high school together. So many of you all who were part of the DNC 60 at that point came from Chicago area, frankly. But we were townies, so we were kind of part of this community. But part of my experience too was I grew up in a family of activists. One of my earliest memories is when I was 3 years old. I was on the shoulders of my dad in an anti-Vietnam War protest, right? So it was the waters I grew up in. Part of the stories I remember from so many of you was about some of the struggles you had with your parents as you tried to tell them about, or sometimes couldn't tell them about what was happening. For me, it was like the exact opposite experience. My parents were so proud, and that will come out a little bit later in some of the other stories, but it was the water I swam in as I grew up. But, college for all of us, I think, is a time to discover who we are, separate from our family, from our parents, and that's what it was for me too, right? I think kind of what Lisa described, I found people that I love being with, that I love to party with, but we were ready to make things happen. And we did that together, but it was about owning the activism myself, rather than just something that I grew up with, that is a legacy that my parents handed to. So that was it for me. So, and by the way, we elected Lawrence to be MC, but we got to make him answer these questions too. So I'm just saying it out loud.
I was good with not doing that. Tell a very quick, hopefully quick story. I got involved my junior year here at U of I studied in Scotland. And as a black kid growing up in the south suburbs in a community where my mom was a school teacher, I very much was, I was a good kid, but I was like a really good kid. Because there was no way in hell I was going to embarrass Shirley James by acting out in any way, shape, or form. So I was very much like Stay in your lane, stay in your lane. And a part of going to Scotland for me was, it was an opportunity to discover who was I without the pressure or the specter of my mom and dad over my shoulder. Even down here, I still felt that specter. And in Scotland, I could be Lawrence. And sidebar, quick story. What I discovered was I was exactly the same to everybody else who knew me. The only person who noticed the difference was me. And that's gone with me the rest of my life. But when I was in Scotland, I felt encouraged to go and do anti-apartheid protesting there. So I'm in Glasgow, doing my thing, and I was like, this is kind of cool. And when I was coming back to U of I thought, well, I wonder if there's a group here that's doing some work. And I'll never forget it, because back then, you had to go to the armory to get all your classes, and because I was coming back, I really didn't have any classes, so I had to go to the armory to get all my classes. It was hot as hell. And I saw this little booth for DNC, and I was like, like God came down in Nirvana. I was like, oh. And I walked over and I signed up. I didn't know what they were doing, but I was like, it said, divestiture, and I was like, cool. And that's how I got involved. And much, like, it still blows my mind how many people who were a part of that movement who were literally people who lived in Allen Hall where I lived, who I didn't even know. I found out last night, like 40 years later, Rich lived in Allen Hall. Lisa lived in Allen Hall, which I knew because she was friends with a friend of mine from grade school and high school. But I was like, wow, I never thought of it as a Allen Hall movement, and it wasn't. But there were tons of people who were in Allen Hall who became a part of this movement. And some of those people became...
Represent. Allen Hall.
So, and some of those people became some of my closest friends in life and to this day. And when we got to doing stuff like the shanties, it was everything that Lisa said. It was just amazing to see a bunch of people from really disparate backgrounds come together, coalesce around some ideas and things to do to make impact. And I think that thematic of making impact in the world follows me in everything I do, even to this day. So we're gonna talk to the young people now, though. I'm like, because we were kind of the old heads. I was a senior, Lisa was a senior, Sia was a junior when this was all going down. Jeff and Susan were significantly younger.
Yeah, we were sophomores.
Right. Susan, talk to us. What brought you?
Sure. So,
Unsullied.
I grew up in a predominantly white middle-class suburb in New Jersey, and for another story, I decided to come to the U of I for college. I was living in Allen Hall. We had this artist in residency program, and I think this is the beginning of sophomore year in the fall. George Halley. He was a renowned photographer from South Africa. And we had these programs where, he would talk to the students. Obviously, his artwork was up. I remember being there at these events, and I had no idea this was going on. And where I had grown up, we had learned about the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr., and then that's kind of what's like in a bow. Our history was very Eurocentric, very, American-centric. And I'm shocked. I'm hearing about apartheid. It's happening right now. These people don't have the right to vote. They're living in these deplorable conditions. It just was unfathomable to me because I was privileged. It was a real light bulb moment, and it stirred me. And I wasn't sure if anything was even going on campus at that time. I also was an anthropology major, and I had already been taking Swahili, actually, for my language for another reason, but I was in class with Jeff that spring, with Don Crum. He was our professor, the history of East and South Africa. And so Jeff came to me in Allen Hall, in the hallway, probably my friends as well, and we're having a rally on the quad. This is April 9th. 1986. I had not been involved. I had only found out about apartheid 6 months earlier and couldn't believe it. I had, like, it was my political awakening is what this whole period of my life was. I guess that's why you come to college sometimes, right? Yeah, so Jeff said, come to the rally, come to the rally. So I went to the rally, and I went by myself. I know all my friends were getting ready to go out to party on Green Street, or whatever. All right, I'll catch up with you guys later. I'm gonna go check out the rally. And I remember, you know, obviously there was like 1,000 people there. I just remember being in the crowd, speaker after speaker after speaker, and just being so moved. And then I'll leave the rest of that for the other question. But that's how I got involved.
Thank you, Sue.
So I came to U of I August of '84. I had been at a conservative, all-male Catholic high school before that.
Did a wonderful job, Jeff.
I was a disciplinary problem. But I came to U of I knowing that I wanted to get involved in something, seeking something to get involved with. And some of you may remember her. Robin Cohen was a teacher in my Spanish 101 course. She told me about the sanctuary movement and what was going on with refugees from El Salvador. I went and got involved in that. And then soon after, I met people like Rich Drury, Teresa Donnelly, Mary Kelly. They were working with student government. I eventually met Rhonda Kurtz as well. And they formed this off-center coalition, which I mentioned before, that ran as a progressive student government slate, took over the majority of student government. And I was the first active member that wasn't somebody running of that. Soon after that, I was around to help form the Divest Now coalition. We did alternative reporting for a divestment report. The U of I put out a report. We put out an alternative report, looked just like it. The 2 issues of the Divestment Times. As I mentioned before, we got arrested at a board of trustees meeting in Chicago. By the spring of '86, I was one of the leaders. So just by being around and doing shit, and helped become one of the leaders of it and lead through all this stuff.
Co-coordinators.
Co-coordinators, yes. So Teresa and I were co-coordinators. Later, Susan and I were co-coordinators. So that was how I first got. I got involved kind of from the ground up, but was learning constantly. So if it wasn't for the fact that people were willing to show me stuff, because I didn't know shit, so I was just learning how to do all this stuff and became one of the leaders of it. And then there's more parts of the story which we'll get to later.
Since you're already there, our second question was, kind of what was happening in '85, '86, from your perspective, in the movement, and especially like the months leading up to kind of the actions that were taking place later in April. What do y'all remember? Like, what was happening before? I remember we had a whole hell of a lot of meetings. And me and Joe would sit in the back and talk shit like the whole time. But what else was happening? Jeff, you told an interesting story this morning about, because I was lambasting us for like not doing more action earlier, and you got a great perspective when we were talking this morning about kind of the lead up. Would you share that?
You're blowing my whole fucking speech.
Oh, sorry, bro.
So we were talking.
T-ball you up, man.
Some of us went to Murphy's last night because that's where we used to go, and it's still some of it's still the same.
Yes, it's still good. Just saying.
But we were talking, and one of the things Lawrence mentioned was that, you know, before April, you guys weren't doing anything really and stuff like that. And I said, well, we wouldn't have been able to get to what we did if we weren't doing a lot of shit. So before the ages of cell phones and websites and stuff, we were leafleting, we were tabling, we went to every board of trustees meeting, no matter where it was, Springfield, Chicago. We were going to all those things. We were putting together, we were doing the stuff to lay the groundwork so that we could get 1,000 people. We could get a few hundred people ready to do stuff. And it was by doing that organizing. And I really want to shout out Steve Apotheker. For those of you who knew Steve. Steve was one of the old guys, and I figured out he was 34. But he was one of the old guys, but he was so open with all of his knowledge and just helped us learn about the issue, and he was humble, and he wouldn't take the lead, he would let us take the lead. And also Teresa Donnelly and Mary Kelly, but Steve has passed, unfortunately, a few years back. We've not been able to locate Teresa Donnelly, Mary Kelly. Well, we found her in New York. She wasn't able to make it. But both of them as well helped. They were my mentors. They helped me learn stuff. They were patient with me. I was able to learn a lot of the skills, not just the knowledge about South Africa, but about how to organize and how to build things. So, and that's what we did. We built, and then we had spring of '86, April
I want
'86.
to add something to the idea that, as I, looking back on it now, because you can see things more clearly, that there was quite a progressive recognition of how to be a leader, who was to be a leader, who could be a leader. There was no assumption that one must be male or white or anything, but to be a leader in any of these organizations, KUCO or DNC, PRC even. So I think about that now, knowing what we are dealing with at the moment. I also think about a recognition, and I think we got some of this from being cultural anthropology students, but also just being folks who had parents or family or what have you in movements from the past. The idea of we were in some ways giving information out in a new way of how to think about things, the interconnectedness of everything. One of the things that blew my mind was learning at that time that Israel had gone to and learned from South Africa how to create the pass systems and other things that they are still currently using on the Palestinian population, etc. And for me, the recognition of both the interconnectedness of movements throughout the world, whether they be local community movements, there's always whether or not we are exchanging information, there is an interconnectedness of justice-seeking folks in the world. And one of the things that gave me confidence was to recognize that I was maybe in a room full of trustees, because they took us to this to a retreat at Lake of the Woods or wherever, something weird, and to learn that we're having conversations with people who are trustees or what have you, and we are talking to them, and they are foggy. We're talking to them about the interconnectedness of things. We're talking to them about how to recognize the need for humanity to work together towards the betterment of humanity, and for somebody who was 20 years old at the time, that was groundbreaking in a way, and has been something that has served me throughout the rest of my career in different areas. You just said something that reminded me of that. I hope I didn't blow Monica's speech.
It's already blown.
Well, and I'm going to riff off of that too, although were you done?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, because I want to riff off of that a little bit too, because you're talking about kind of what was happening right there at that point, and hindsight's 2020. I remember our impatience. I remember we were going to go build a shanty, we were going to get it out there. We wanted to get arrested when we went in, and they didn't arrest us that night. What was wrong with them? So we had to occupy the student union overnight. But there was that looking back now to know that we were standing on the shoulders of a decade of student organizing, right? And so this momentum had been building since '77, I think is what I heard you say. And 86 here, 9-10 years later, we had the benefit of all of that work that had been done. And this is kind of like, what's the lesson for today that I know we're going to get to more toward the end of this. We keep blowing the questions. But that idea that at the time, our impatience was needed to get us across the finish line and to achieve what we did. So there is something about that impatience that we
You keep telling me to wait.
right?
Okay, so you keep telling me to wait. I'm tired of waiting.
And yet we know it takes a long time to make this happen. Both things are true, but take a lot, right? And I think that's what was happening on the ground then as well. Was trying to continue that momentum that had been built over decades. So, yep.
I think one of the things I remember from that period of time before action was the level of sophistication of the folks who were leading in DNC. I mean, I came in with no history with any of these folks. And I remember we were having conversations around, like, gender equality. Like, I ain't gonna lie, I mean, I went to a white Catholic high school too. We weren't talking about nothing like gender equality in our high school, right? So I'm sitting here like, what the fuck are these people talking about? I was like, there's an issue. And I'm like, I'm seeing it play out. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so, you know, having co-leaders of each gender, you know, the LGBTQIA folks were like, well, why aren't we addressing issues around sexuality in this movement? And really trying to be like, but this is the issue. We appreciate that, but we're going to stay focused. And just, you know, how are we going to try to attack these issues with the Board of Trustees and with the university, and also try to bring students and get them involved. I mean, I remember we would have these conversations around, like, you know, and it would come to folks like me and Lisa, like, there are a lot of black students who are involved in the movement. How do we get more black students involved in this movement? And, you know, trying to think through how we might do that. And, you know, somewhat successfully, but not nowhere near as successful as I think any of us would have liked that to be.
It was strange. It was really strange how few were involved. It was really strange how few were involved. It was always a sore spot for me.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, I mean, you know, strange is a good word for it. It was like, why, you know, like, why?
I would actually like to put out there that also we have to recognize we have a bit more sophistication in recognizing that all of the that invisible labor and that silent labor that students of color are doing, the stuff that they're carrying. Are you the first in your family to go to university? Are you on financial aid? Do you have to make sure you keep this GPA? I'm not saying that white students didn't have to do that, but in terms, if we want to look at it in terms of statistics, those number of students, smaller number of students on campus, and also dealing with a lot of invisible labor that we didn't necessarily see or recognize at the time. Being a townie and growing up in a predominantly white community at a predominantly white institution, I already had inroads that a lot of students, and I learned being a teacher for many years, because a lot of students from African-American students from the south side of Chicago and other places did not necessarily have. I will say though that once we got to those sort of 3 intense days, some of the students did find a way to really be involved. They were always supportive. They were never not supportive. But if you think about the Iota Phi Theta and Phi Beta Sigma, the black fraternities that came and performed, they were stomping against apartheid at our rallies and those kinds of things. Those sort of short bursts of being able to participate as opposed to being able to be in the longer haul for it. I'm not trying to make excuses for us, but I'm just, again, hindsight 2020, I think about the sorts of things that I was carrying as the first person in my family to go to university, et cetera, money, et cetera, trying to be an RA and a PA so I could get my room and board paid for until I finally had to take out my little student loan, right, in order to live in an apartment because I got kicked out of my PA shit. So, but it was a conversation. There was a conversation about that was happening. It's not that there were any easy answers. And I don't want to make excuses for us, but I always felt sort of on the knife's edge of all of those things. So.
Well, I'm going to say what I said to someone earlier, where I think black people, especially educated and middle class and upper middle class black people, then and now, drunk on colonizer Kool-Aid, being comfortable. You don't, when you are at the top of tier of the economic group of your folks don't want their little votes disrupted. It's interesting to me now.
You don't have yet centuries of support, financial support or whatever.
Right. It's just here we all are. But yeah, it was a barrier then, and I think it remains a barrier right now.
I don't know. Since I got
There's some truth to that, Cam. Cam and I actually know each other from
Childhood.
Yeah, when I was in trade school, all the way forward to here at the University of Illinois.
Yes.
I think some of it was also what you alluded to, Lawrence. There's a steeped into us as Black children is like when you leave the house, last thing your mother says to you, don't embarrass the family.
You represent
not only your family, your community, the race, the weight of the world is on you when you step out of that door. And I distinctly remember being more afraid of what my parents were going to say. That the police, that's nothing. It was my brain. If my parents find out, I am toast. So I think a lot of that, and I do believe because frankly, I first became aware of DNC when I heard things from friends who were at Howard. And I was, I was like, okay, there was a rumblings going on at some HBCUs as well. But I don't know if they were getting the same visibility as what was happening on some of the PWI campuses. Yeah, and so I'm like, okay, that's got to be happening here, and I want to be in the center of it. So I honestly think that played into it, that when I did get involved and saw that, as you said, it was concerning, like where are we at? You know, maybe that made other students think, well, is that some subversion stuff? Are they trying to set us up? What's going on over there?
Which is a fair question.
Yeah, so, but you know, I was all in. I was drinking the other Kool-Aid.
The good Kool-Aid.
Like I told you before, it's like, are we going to get a grad school? But, and I had some fears, but I was still falling forward at the same time. But I do remember other Black students on campus saying to me, why are you doing that? Don't mess with that. You know, you can get yourself in trouble. But they said it in a way, it was like, they were scareful.
Yeah, for well-being.
Yeah.
And
Susan, you were talking about
Yeah, I do.
your journey, and you kind of came maybe to the action taking a little bit later, but talk to us maybe a little bit more about your experiences with like Professor Crummy and some of those things that kind of became eye-opening experiences for you that maybe led you into the movement.
Sure. I mean, as I said, like the first introduction about the apartheid movement, or about apartheid in general, was from George Hallett. And it was just this whole thing about going to college and learning about there's a world out there outside of this little town in New Jersey and everything I had been taught. And that education continued for me. You know, as I mentioned, I was studying Swahili. I had the opportunity as part of the U of I student to go to an intensive Swahili program in Kenya for a summer, and just important, I think, for our kids today, you know, to be taught more than maybe what's in their own backyard.
I want to connect it to the current state of the world today. Part of the reason that there is such a huge and strong push, especially with this regime, against higher education is because, as Chef from South Park says, there's a time and a place for everything, and it's called college. And that is where you are, you know, you're going to be placed with a roommate of a different race or from a small town in southern Illinois and south side of Chicago, and you are no longer under the direct supervision of your parents, and so this is a place to explore something, and this is the reason why I think education is also trying to be dismantled, because if done correctly, education moves you, I believe, education moves you away from being self-centered and insular and out to being connected to a community, and that is dangerous to the status quo.
That's why we have you up here talking. That's what it was right there. Let me move on to our next question. It's the day of. The 60 get arrested on April 10th at the Board of Trustees meeting, literally in this room, which is insane. Completely by happenstance, by the way. Share a story or two about that day that stands out in your memory 40 years later. And we're going to do this a little bit in order. Lisa and I are going to go first because we were a part of the first 16. Then we're going to have Sia speak about her experience as a part of the 3. And then Susan will speak as a part of her experience as a part of the 41. And Jeff was running around doing whatever the hell he was doing. Jeff was coordinating. So we'll have each of them speak a little bit about, what do you remember? Lisa, what sort of
I
stood
remember
out?
a couple of things, quite a few things. One of them is, if I may point out to our fantastic graphics designer, Pat, in the back.
And then put your hand up,
raise your hand up, brother. Fantastic graphics for our COVID and whatnot, because of you and Pat and other things. But I also know that we were thinking about things, and if you one of the things they didn't want to do was be seen arresting a young man in a wheelchair. And so we were like, Pat, why don't you go in for that?
That was your first mistake. That was awful public.
But I do remember, it started the night before with the rally, the buzz, the energy of all of us being involved in something that we hope would be larger than ourselves. But I do remember few of the things I remember about being arrested is, well, also just about a lot, but this is before I was in theater, before I was in public speaking, and I was, I was still Carolyn Dixon's daughter. My mama was right here in town. So it was, I remember two things. One, my grandfather was coming to live with us. My mom brought him into the living room while she was getting his bags out of the car, and he started yelling for her because he saw me on television. My grandfather was 95.
Girl, get in here. You need to go to television.
And the thing he said that I carried with me for the rest of my life is, I told my mom and he said, well, a fella's got to help a fella out. My grandfather was born in 1890, and my grandfather was the son of a freed slave. So it wasn't, that far, not that far apart. And he was very proud of that. So I remember carrying that with me. I remember carrying that with me through the zip ties and the terrible bologna sandwiches. Yeah. And I remember leaving the jailhouse or wherever it was, police station, and then going to class. Yeah. I had to go to class. Yeah. I was a big girl went to class. And I remembered falling asleep in class and drooling, and the teacher was just like, we're going to get rid of it. Anthropology. So, but I remember that it was, if controlled chaos makes sense, that was what it was. We had a very clear plan about how we were going to do things. We had people coordinating in the back, and then we had people out front doing things, and we were very, very disciplined, I thought, in our movement. I mean, I remember remembering things like, we went to the courthouse and found out that our phones were tapped. We remember, because you could do that back in those days, you could find that stuff out. I just remember it being both a disciplined movement, but also something that celebrated our life and community together. So that was way more than what you asked for.
No, it's beautiful. You remind me, I remember sleeping in the quad, or sitting in the South Lounge, and waking up, and Sterling Sullivan, we were roommates, and I can't remember if Sterling slept there or not, but we had this conversation. He's like, where are you going? And I was like, I gotta go home and take a shower and put on some fresh clothes. I gotta look good if I'm getting arrested, right? So I remember that. I was like, I had to curate my outfit.
And they got your name backwards too.
The best thing ever. And I must admit, I have to thank Brian and Harvey, because my good foolish Catholic ass was like, so Lawrence James, I call it the curse of the double first name. I spend almost every day correcting people. It's not James Lawrence, it's Lawrence James. And so we were at court, and they're calling out James Lawrence, and I can't remember if it was Harvey or if it was Brian. They're calling me, and I'm getting ready to get up, and I'm going to tell them. I'm like,
This is my.
it's Lawrence James, damn it. And I'm like, I think it was Brian. He's like, sit down. And I'm looking at him like, what you mean? I was like, because I'm not going to jail 3 times because now you're going to tell me to sit down and then they're going to find out who I am and I'm in contempt. She's like, no, you good. I said, I'm sorry. So I was one of the first people to be arrested. I never got a summons from the university.
You didn't?
Because, so Ryan's kept.
Didn't know who you were.
Lawrence James ain't Sully. The rest of y'all got records. And there's some motherfucker named James Lawrence, University of Illinois campus, who might have got kicked out of school.
He was never heard from again.
It was like Cuba. I just remember, you know, and these guys haven't said it. That shit was fun. I mean, we had so much fun. Doing cool stuff, doing impactful stuff. But most of what I remember is being with a bunch of amazing people, doing something that was really cool and amazing, but that was super fun. And the last thing I remember is, after we got arrested, they zip tied us and we're walking out, and we're trying to go, like, I think Pat was in front of me. I remember looking up and seeing like 40 people in this hallway, and just thinking, wow, that's fucking amazing. Like, all these people are out here, and everybody's shouting Amandla, and we're shouting back, and it was just like, I was like, we did this. We pulled this off. I mean, it's, that is etched in my soul till the day I die. It was amazing. So the 3, we all got arrested, and then
16 of you got arrested.
16 got arrested. They hauled us out, and then 3 folks were not volunteered, I think, to go back in. We weren't picked because these were not folks who were in leadership.
Yeah.
They just kind of volunteered, and so Sia, unfortunately, the last one left.
Last of the
of
3,
talk to us about, what do you remember?
Yeah, it's been so interesting to bring these memories back and start talking about them again. And I hope y'all chime in afterwards with your memories too, because we are piecing together our memories. And even last night, we were kind of reframing history a little bit to kind of go, okay, we got to correct this, because we each remember it a little differently. But yeah, I feel like y'all were the A team that went in, and we were the B team, and the first 16 got arrested, and so they had to call up. Somehow you think it was Teresa who negotiated to get 3 of us in to read the resolution, right? And so we were going to read the resolution, and they were going to let us do that, and then they hoped to get about their business, right? So we agreed to go in so we could read the resolution, the 3 of us, and of course, we read the resolution, they started their business again, we kind of looked at each other and went, yeah, no, it's not happening. And we started yelling.
You stood up.
Yeah, we started, just the 3 of us, back over in that corner, is where I think we were. Back over in that corner.
There's a photo of it.
Yeah, and so we started yelling, "Divest now," right? And you'll see in the photo in the back, Sterling's got his fist in the air doing his thing. But what I
Do you have
remember.
any idea that all these people were in the hallway?
They totally checked. And so, what they were hoping, of course, was that we would read the resolution and go away. But when we started yelling, and our 3 voices were just 3 voices, and we could feel that. But what happened was, as soon as we started yelling, everybody in the hallway started yelling. And the power
Not yelling,
of that, chanting, yeah, they were chanting,
Yelling
right? And the power of that coming into the room, y'all, was something. It was just really amazing. So of course they hauled us out, arrested us, and then because everybody out in the hallway was making all the noise too. I know they started arresting all, now by that time I was gone, so then the question is,
Yeah.
what happened next?
Well, for
Because there is an iconic picture
Yes.
that actually went around
Yeah.
the country of
Yes.
somebody being raised up.
Yes.
You got a spinal adjustment.
Yes.
So when we went into the union the night before, and at this point, all I knew was we were taking over the union. And, you know, I just kind of went with the crowd. I didn't know anybody. I didn't really have any friends. I mean, I knew Jeff from the door, but, you know, he was doing his thing. And so I just kind of went on my own, and then we all sort of settled, I guess, in the South Lounge. And Jeff and I had an exam the next day in our African history class. Tom Crummy actually came to the union and talked to us. But I even, all night, I remember studying for the test. So I was figuring I was taking it the next day. So meanwhile, I'm not an organizer. So these guys, all the leaders, they're like having all their little secret meetings and trying to figure out what we're going to do. And then they talk to us individually. So I know somebody talked to me and said, okay, this is what we're going to do tomorrow. We're going to go to the board meeting. And were you willing, some people were willing to get arrested, and some people, they weren't going to do it.
Some people who were students had been arrested in Chicago or Springfield,
Yes.
so could not be arrested
Right.
here, or they
Right.
would be expelled.
And I think just from my place of privilege, I wasn't thinking much about it. Like, sure, get me arrested, I don't care, not thinking about consequences. Nonetheless, so all I know is I was part of, in this hallway with massive people. I guess there were a couple hundred of us probably. And as they arrested the first 16, we saw them get let out. Then we did see you three get let out. And we just keep chanting and chanting. By now I'm like near the front. And the people who knew they couldn't get arrested or didn't want to get arrested, they stayed in the back. The university police were saying, you must leave now or you will get arrested for trespassing. And they're yelling this at us. And I guess we sat down and then one at a time, we got let out. And there is a picture of me with the zip tie too, that was in the Illini from the back, with my thing. And there's all these people, like you're talking about how you saw the people in the hallway. When we got let out, there were all these students outside.
And community members.
Yeah, like it was a big crowd cheering for everybody. And then they brought us, we weren't at the police station when we went, the 41 of us, they had to bring us to some house.
It was a weird house.
House thing
The White House.
and whatnot, but, that's what happened at that point. And by the way, Crummy, we missed our exam, but, and there was another woman who was also in our class, we can't remember her name, who was also with us. He just had us write a paper about what we did.
The ANC.
Yeah, we had to write a paper about the African National Congress.
And why it influenced what we did.
Yeah, there you go. I was gonna say what we did and why we did it, so same thing again. So, God bless Don Brothers.
I just want to say, we were on the local news quite a bit. And so it wasn't just students who got arrested, it was the DNC 60 were students, but there were community members, there were of all ages, some of who are here today. So we felt we were supported, and I think not just by the student body, but by folks in the community.
Can I throw one of the memory in before Jeff goes too? One of the things I remember at the time, and for those of you who were in the 40 out in the hallway, I remember the campus cops were kind of the kinder, gentler version, right?
Not very much so,
But I remember one of them actually complimenting us on, because we were doing the passive resistance thing, right? And so they were complimenting us on how organized we were. And then the Champaign cops showed up in riot.
Started pulling people up by the face.
I remember that the campus cops were pissed because they were afraid that the Champaign cops were going to escalate things because they're showing up in riots, right? And so now, right? Yeah, so and so it's just interesting looking back on that now with what we know now. The campus cops had been working with us, they knew us, they were working on de-escalation. I recognize that for what it is now. And then, of course, the Champaign cops were doing the exact opposite. So that was, but I'd be interested if others of you, afterwards we can talk, others of you in the room have some memories about that too. Because it's kind of
Never thought
interesting.
about that before you said it, but it fits perfectly.
I don't know.
Because that's, the escalation came once Champaign police, I mean,
Showed up.
and the whole energy of the space changed with the presence of Champaign police.
Yeah.
I mean, I frankly never realized that until right now.
Yeah.
Richard?
Jeff, what was your experience? 'Cause you didn't get arrested, and on purpose, but you were coordinating.
So, a few things. To step back to the night before, we had the rally, and the rally was meant to fire people up. And Prexy Nesbitt was our ace in the hole, and he gave a fiery speech, but he said, "I will not advocate for you to take over the union because I'm being paid by the U of I and I can't do that." So Tom Burke was chosen. So Prexy gives this great speech, everybody's fired up, and he stops, and then Tom gets to say, "We're going to take over the union." And everybody did. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people did. So that was a clear memory. The day of, so by the time the second group, the 3 people were arrested, the board stopped meeting, and that did not happen. Like, they temporarily adjourned after the first thing, but they stopped. There's a picture of President Eikenberry and that they were looking very unhappy, and they were taken out because they were then afraid of the old.
Oh, yeah, they were.
So, part of my memory, so Teresa and I were co-coordinators. We were not going to get arrested because we were on conduct probation, and from being arrested the year before. Teresa was up front agitating as much as anybody, and just saying, if the cops said anything, she's like, "Oh, I'm not getting arrested." That would be her answer. "I'm not getting arrested, that's a decision." So you just said, okay. I just had to keep on doing shit until it came down for that. Myself, I don't know how I did this. I had to run downstairs across the union up to our office on the second floor, which we shared with the People's Alliance on Central America, and at that point the Gay Lesbian Illini. We had the hub, 270 Illini Union, but that was where the phone was. I had to call Brian Savage, our lawyer. I had to start calling the press, and then back and forth. I don't know how I did that. And then we had to get everybody to start going out to see where people were going, and we were trying to figure out where people being taken. And then the super fun part was figure out who all was arrested. Because we were trying to say, because we had our cadre of people who were the first people arrested, the second people, some of the first other people, but people were caught up, and we were trying to say, this is civil disobedience, be careful, know what you're doing. And there were a few people who I think we came to regret later, who were not serious about it, who got arrested, who then didn't show up to the hearings and stuff like that. But by and large, everybody was serious about it, but it was like, we wanted people not to just get caught up and realize this is a serious statement you're making. And then trying to figure out who all the 60 were, get their names, and then, because school was only in session for another few weeks, was to get everybody's summer phone numbers. This is before cell phones, so we're getting all that stuff. So those are some of my memories about that. Yeah.
And disciplinary hearings and.
But I wanted to, stressing to them that civil disobedience was a tactic not to be used lightly. But to also stress, we shut the board of trustees down. That, I mean, that doesn't happen. They arrest people and they get them. We shut them down. Yeah, that was pretty amazing. Paying attention to time. Talk to me about what's been the impact of your participation in this movement in your lives as you think now, in retrospect, 40 years later?
Are you looking at me?
I'm looking at all of you.
Oh, okay.
No particular order, whoever wants.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Right.
All right. So a couple of things. One, I think we were already friends, but it made lifelong friends for me of many people. And a lifelong friendship, but a community built-in activism, in love, in caring. It helped me to go from, it helped change my way of thinking about how one participates in being an active member of society. And one of the main things for many years that I taught my students, I taught here for 27 years, and one of the main things I said to my students is to be a good actor, to be a good artist, you must first be a good citizen of the world. And the way to be a good citizen of the world is to be involved in it, not looking at it. And to be, and all, I feel that all of that, much of that came from my participation here. That I was able to, although it wasn't specifically pointed at political activism, well, I mean, come on, house theater, the personal is political, right? To recognize that the personal is political. And that we are, if you are to be a good human, you know, the thing that we do right now that's basically a bad word, empathy, and then work with empathy, not just empathy by itself and tisk-tisking and drinking your tea, but empathy, whatever you can do. I can no longer, you know, I use a cane, I have some physical disability issues, but I would always tell my students, because they would also leave class to go to different rallies on the quad, I said, my job isn't to be on the front lines, but my job is to make sandwiches and have bail money. That is what I do. I make sandwiches and have bail money, or a place to stay if someone needs it, when they are out doing the work of the world.
Why don't you go?
I was saying this to Anita when we were chatting before this. What this movement taught me was each of us in our own small ways can have impact and create impact. And sorry, I know because I'm thinking. Sorry. When Lawrence goes thoughtful, he goes quiet. It makes all of my therapy.
What does James do?
There is no James. Dr. James goes very quiet and speaks in this really deep voice and says things like, "So why are you here?"
They're yelling, time medicine.
They're like, "Dr. James, I can't hear you." Whatever. I think about this movement taught me a lot about having and creating impact. We did that with what we did, and the rest of my career, whether as a clinician in individual therapy or moving into consulting with large organizations and leaders, I'm now thinking about how do you create impact across the globe with African descent communities. That thematic continues to run through everything that I do and everything that I think about. And so I also think about the sophistication of what we did, how we did it, and lessons learned. And so I would say coming into DNC and being a part of the 60 has had a lifelong impact on not only who I am, but how I sort of transpire in the world. I was talking to some people recently, with 47 being in office, and everybody at the beginning of his term was like, I want to do something. People were all up in arms, and the constant text messages that I was getting of mental masturbation about it, and people were like, what the fuck, stop sending me these messages. And they asked me, Lawrence, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, is my honest answer. I'm waiting for it to come to me. And when it does, I'll act. And all I ever came up with, which wasn't much, was whatever actions are happening, I'm going to participate in. That was my way of having impact. Has it changed anything? No. But it's a trigger. It's a pebble. And so for me, that, I think a lot about our actions not only have consequences, but create impact. And so I continue to try to think through how can you take action to have impact.
I'm sorry, I just have to throw in this. You are a clinician, correct?
Yes, I'm
You
clinical psychologist.
help both individuals and groups. So the one thing I would say is, thinking back to where we were in the 80s, and thinking where I am, because I'm working on this right now as well as this, we did, people of color, and especially black folks, were like, we don't need no therapy, right? So you are representative of something that we didn't used to think that we needed or that we could successfully do. So the fact that I have students that African-American male students that I've tried to get a meeting with an African-American psychologist here on campus, and there's 2.
Yeah.
There's only 2. But there didn't used to be any. So I think part of what you're doing is also, to me, representative of how we are moving through the world. The fact that you are in public health is representative to me of our connection to the work that we've done. I know I talk a lot, forgive me, but I ain't even had nothing to drink. Wait till later. So I kind of feel like the way that we go on to live our lives can be representative of the kind of human beings we were beginning to become during that experience.
Tell them to call. I only work with black men in my practice right now. So.
Can I please?
Yeah,
Okay.
seriously.
Give me your card.
See ya.
So I had to go back and look at what the question was. So this is about personal
Personal
impact.
impact, yes.
Personal impact. Yeah, you know, it's hard to untangle all the pieces. I think when we were talking last night, we were trying to figure out, we were having some stories about there were so many things happening all at once back in those days, right? And to untangle the particular impact of this over everything else. But I think there was something about being together in community and making really important things happen that has an impact throughout your entire life, right? So I went into, my work is with local governments and nonprofits now around a lot of governance issues. And I find myself, so I work with kind of elected officials and folks in leadership, and I often find myself sitting at the table kind of representing who the board of trustees were back then, right? So I find myself on that side of the table now, and it's a weird place to be. But one of the things I think I've tried to bring with me is helping those I work with understand when somebody is yelling at you from across the table, wanting something, what's that about and how do we work with it, right? That there's really important pieces there and we need to work together differently than what we saw with how the board of trustees worked with us, right? So if we can understand what protest is and the importance of it, and especially now we understand the importance of protest to our democracy, so I try to bring that into the work that I do every day with, especially with local governments that I work with. It was interesting, I was working, Pat and I were having a conversation about working with local law enforcement now, which is super interesting, right? And the irony, but understanding, I know we should have put Pat on the panel, except you keep saying you're not a speaker, but
Sorry we put you on blast, Pat.
but helping, like even something as simple as helping law enforcement understand that this is not a sign of aggression, right? Something as simple as that is just really kind of an interesting piece that it's the water we swim in, but it's not what they swim in. And so how do we start to have some of those conversations? So that's been part of my life.
For me, I mean, the impact was obvious, like as I said, it was a huge political awakening for me, and I've never gone back to sleep. I guess you could say I'm woke. I didn't pursue, like at the time I thought, well, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna fix everything, conquer the world, and fight for equality, and I didn't want to get my master's degree in women's studies and history, and And then, you know, life takes life, and then you get a corporate job, and blah, blah, blah. But never shut up. Never will. I always, you know, when I'm in a situation where somebody says something that is ignorant about racism or gender or sexuality, I can't be quiet, because I've learned to stand up and to not to yell, but to maybe discuss and open up somebody's mind. The most important impact I feel I've made is on my two daughters' lives, who my husband and I have chosen. We chose to raise our children in Evanston. That was a conscious decision, because Evanston, Illinois is a progressive town, multicultural, multi-socioeconomic. I knew they would learn more history than what I had been exposed to. And so proud then brought them to their first protests during the Occupy Wall Street days in Chicago, downtown Chicago. I have video of my 9-year-old daughter, Shannon, like, you know, united, divided, whatever it was, or we are the 99%, and those kids went on, and they're like 25 and 28 now, to Black Lives Matter protests, anti-Gaza war, pro-Palestinian protests. Like, they are still active, they are still outspoken, and to me that is sort of my greatest legacy.
So first off, everybody raised their hand who was arrested that day. Look around, everybody. All right, lots of folks. Raise your hand if you were there but couldn't get arrested that day, if you were still part of the support. All right, so I was ready for change, and my life was changed. I mean, that definitely, it changed my life. I was ready for it. I wanted it, and it's impacted my entire life. One of the things that, talking to people over preparing this, and talking to even people last night and today, is the impact is all over the place. So one of our goals, I mean, our main goal was to get investments out of South Africa, to get divestment, and to help get rid of apartheid. But also, one of the goals, which I learned later in my organizing, is putting people in motion, to change people's lives, to make people look at the system and not take everything that they were given growing up for granted, and look at how people can be put in motion. And I've seen everybody I've talked to so far, I haven't talked to everybody, but their lives were altered by this. This is something people remember, and whatever career path they may have taken, it seems to have been important. And that to me is a huge success. That was a success that we had as a movement doing that. So the past 30 years, I've worked for nonprofits, worked for Champaign County Healthcare Consumers, worked for Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and basically, I've become the administrator of the revolution. So I'm the guy who does books and all that shit. I do the books. The newspaper, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, is back there. Take one if you want.
Are you the president of Antifa?
You guys don't have like an office or a headquarters, right?
I'll tell you later.
But again, I just think that it's important. And one of the crucial things was when I donated my archive. I was convinced by a friend, Debbie Sheldon, some of you may know, to donate my stuff to the Champaign County Historical Archives. Yeah, she convinced me. And that was now, it was like 12 years ago already, that donated this stuff. And that started the collection there. I hoped we can grow it. There was some stuff from them back there. They do have a lot of stuff. It's crucial for everybody here, for all of us, to document our stories. We have to document our stuff and be able to pass it on. So there's a sign-up sheet back there. My goal, even though I have I have 3 jobs, I got a lot of shit to do, is that I want to try to do an oral history project over the next year or so, do people over Zoom. We're going to try to do it this weekend, but that's just too much. To talk to people, to get your stories, and we can put them in the archive so that students or not just students, anybody who wants to come can study and can listen to our stories, and we can figure out. And part of it, telling your story is important, because you create your own myth, and part of the myth is how we've struggled and we've changed things. So it's important for us to do this. So please sign up back there. I will contact you, I promise. It might take a while.
Thank you,
For those who don't know, this is where the Champaign County Historical Archive is. So if you're looking for it, this is what the building is.
It's on those checks.
There's some leaflets back there. And free swag.
So executive decision, we have one more question. Skip that, because we run out of time. A great discussion. Professor Barnes?
Can I, before Professor Barnes,
Come on,
I would
man.
like Lisa to read the resolution that we read in this room.
Well,
Okay, you can do that, Professor Barnes.
You can do it after, Professor.
You want to do
Professor Barnes.
Okay, Professor Barnes' name is Terry.
We feel like we're students again when we come back here. So.
I'll say it's really, Don Crummy has passed away, but his widow still lives in town, and I will certainly tell her that you all remember Don, like as a role model, someone that she'll be really happy to hear that. They asked me to say something about South Africa now, so I hope that this will be, we'll find a way to draw all this together. The first, as you all know, the first one person, one vote democratic elections were held in 1994 and have been held every 4 years since then. So if I go back to that analogy of poison being poured into the soil for 350 years, then what grows out of that soil? We have to expect that some of those things, a lot of those things that will come will be twisted and deformed for quite some time. One recent example of this twisted and deformed ideas is the idea that because they've lost preferential access to resources and services, that white South Africans are the victims of genocide. That just is. Anyway, it's out there. They're in Illinois. There's 20 of them there's 20 of the folks in Chicago now, and they're expecting 200 more by the end of the year. So this twisted and deformed idea. Crime is another example of a twisted and deformed thing. Everyone knows that crime is a huge problem in South Africa, but I think it's the result of those centuries of poison, because if you relentlessly pound on the institutions of family and community until they crack, and you keep pounding until they're crushed, it's tremendously difficult to put personal morality and collective accountability back together again. So, how does that poison get neutralized? I think that only the application of ideas of deracialization can do that slowly and consistently over time. And that's the idea that race is a nasty fiction, and no one is innately better than anyone else. So, Susan asked me to do this, and maybe you'll find it fun. I'm going to give the now 32-year-old New South Africa a report card. I guess I am a professor. With a grade of A. So A. It has some. South Africa has been successful in equalizing access to services like grants and pensions. All the apartheid laws have been removed from the books. Black and white workers in the same job are paid the same, for example. There are no legal restrictions on who you can love, who you can have sex with, where you can live, or where you can travel. South Africa has been successful in ending its military campaigns against its neighbors. It's no longer the regional military aggressor. It's been successful in supporting and upholding the rights of other oppressed peoples, notably its solidarity with the Palestinians. In charging Israel with crimes against humanity and with genocide, South Africa has paid a high price for those acts of solidarity with the Palestinians. They've maintained a healthy, vibrant, and skeptical political atmosphere. There's still hard-earned freedom of the press. The new Constitution of South Africa gets an A. And also, I was thinking, I want to just mention that South African scientists were at the forefront of identifying COVID variants. I don't know if you all remember that. And recently also the hantavirus strains. So those things, the new South Africa gets an A. gets a B on demonstrating the richness and generosity of African culture and the range of capabilities of African people. I say we get a B on that. Now we're coming to C, coming to grips with the political atrocities and abuses of the past through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a praiseworthy attempt that did not go far enough or last long enough. And also I think history teaching in South Africa gets a C. Now we're on to D. Redistributing material resources, land, jobs, economic opportunity, despite or perhaps because of a set of only mild affirmative action type policies. South Africa is actually now the most unequal, not the poorest, but the most unequal country on the planet. The gaps between rich and poor are the widest of any country on earth. Millions of South Africans are desperately poor, a few are fabulously rich, and these divisions are still largely along racial lines. And if some of you have been to South Africa, so if you went into a residential area, you saw that most residential areas are still extremely racially segregated. F. Government officials resisting the temptation to mimic the deep corruption of the old South Africa gets an F. Personal enrichment at the expense of the vulnerable and disenfranchised is running rampant. Gender-based violence, the strong having the right to dominate the weak, is overwhelming in South Africa, and disregarding the needs of the most vulnerable continues as a government tradition. So that's my report card for the new South Africa. I did a little sum of so many. Maybe you all can talk about this as well. Winnie Mandela, I'm wearing a Winnie Mandela t-shirt. She once surveyed the new South Africa in dismay, and she asked, "Is this the country I ruined my life for? It cannot be." So disillusionment, I think maybe you noticed this, disillusionment is everywhere in South Africa, but the slow, hard slog to reorient every single state function away from ensuring entitlement to ensuring equality, that slow, hard slog grinds on, even if it often loses its way. As for those of us here in the U.S., the divestment struggle and the ordinary people's campaigns in the 70s and the 80s, and I consider you all to be, ordinary people, we're all just ordinary people, to mount those campaigns and to defy Ronald Reagan, the racists, the conservatives, and the anti-communists, and to materially and morally support liberation movements around the world. Those are great highlights in our national and personal histories. Those memories continue to inspire solidarity movements today. Our institution, the U of I, sadly cannot share in that limelight. As you know, even after voting to divest, the university only shed $3 million of its $130 million holdings in companies that did business in South Africa back in the 80s. Now the university claims that it's the university foundation that looks after its investment portfolio, and therefore nothing can be done because investing has changed since the 1980s. In addition, university administration has suppressed, prosecuted, fired, and expelled political and environmental justice activists of the university community who hurt no one and destroyed nothing. I brought a photo of the hour encampment of 2024. It's not a shanty town. We didn't build it, but people put up tents. And that was for 12 days in the same time of year, 2024 around. There was a divestment aspect to it. There were different aspects to it, but a lot of resonances with your struggles. And in Urbana, a hard-working coalition led by community members and including students, staff, and faculty persuaded the city council to adopt the first ethical investment policy of any city in Illinois. To to divest from companies that profit from the genocide in Gaza. This happened just last week. Once again, it took years of dedicated commitment by many people, and it is a huge achievement. So the struggle continues, and we can hope, and maybe, we can hope and maybe even have faith, even in these dark days, that the arc of the universe still bends towards justice.
Okay.
She dropped the mic, so I don't know what else there is.
Yeah, I don't know.
Thank you, Professor.
Terry, Professor Terry.
Time for questions, thoughts, reflections. Oh, I'm sorry. We got time. Do it.
Motion for full divestment of University of Illinois funds from corporations doing business in South Africa. From the Divest Now Coalition to the University of Illinois Board of Trustees, date April 10th, 1986. Whereas Reverend Sullivan has called for institutions to divest from corporations in South Africa by May of 1987 if apartheid is not dismantled, then be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the University of Illinois agree to begin the divestiture of their investments by May 1987 and to complete this action within 2 years if the following conditions have not been met in South Africa. 1, the abolition of all past laws. 2, an end to the segregated living areas known as Bantustans. 3, one person, one vote representation in the government. A little bit.
Time for a little Q&A. Before we go, Laura, so many of you, yes,
Okay.
Lori is it famous or infamous? I'm not really sure. Lori, this is the lady who many of you may have seen in the newspapers, who got her head wrenched and ripped up by her neck. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and some of the things that happened for you? Because I think for those of us who didn't necessarily know your story, I mean, I found it very interesting when we were talking about it earlier today. And then we're going to take some questions.
Okay. As you noted how there was a different dynamic going on with the police. I definitely was aware of that between the campus police as opposed to the tone that was set when the Champaign police came in. And the thing I had said to Lawrence and others, it seemed a lot more vast out in that hallway. I was shocked at the scale. Yeah, it seemed so small, did it not? But the thing that I thought we were most focused on is we had been trained pretty much to clasp our arms around each other and to go limp as much as possible to prevent yourself from being injured in the event that you get yanked up, if you will, by the authorities, which is ultimately what happened. And so I had to explain to Terry, the professor, that she was like, "What's this like?" I said, really, they were. I was feeling like I was getting choked. I wasn't trying to resist, but they literally had gripped me in such a way that I almost had to hold on to his hands to prevent him from really harming me. It was really scary in that regard. But just fast forwarding, I was telling folks as I arrived that one of the we all suffered disciplinary type hearings from our various colleges. And I was in the College of Engineering at the time. I was a junior. And, I was pushing back pretty much like, this is ridiculous, this couldn't be policy, because they were trying to put me on a probation effectively that said that I couldn't participate on activities on campus, or else I would be kicked out of school. And the positive outcome, because I was involved in an organization called National Society of Black Engineers, and it was chapters all over the country, and I had traveled actually on the University of Dime, to conventions regionally and nationally, met students all over the country. Many of those students reached out to me, especially from historically black colleges, and explained to me that their universities had what were called welcoming policies, meaning during the civil rights movement, it was common, or unfortunately for students often to be dismissed from school because of their activities on campus, if they were labeled subversive or what have you. And these universities had policies that would admit you if that happened to you at your university. So I obviously tried to explain that to my parents who weren't having it. They did not want me to get kicked out of school. So luckily I was able to matriculate and graduate, but that was one of the things that happened to me that was very touching, that outreach from other students at other universities. And again, that was all because, as Lauren said, that went viral. It was the wire service. This is pre-internet, so we would call it viral. But what the wire service allowed at the time, I think it was Associated Press, is any media outlet, not only here locally, nationally, but in the world, could pick up that image. And so I was getting calls from people as far as Hawaii who had seen that image for me to make an observation or a comment. So it was impactful in that way. But and then forward on, it definitely impacted me when I applied to law school and tried to sit for the bar, because there's a character in fitness. Now I was able to get through those hurdles, but yeah, it would constantly come up in those regards. But the world has changed, so it wasn't something that ever stopped me in that regard. If anything,
Thank you, Lord, for sharing that. Time for questions, thoughts, perspectives. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Ken Salo. I have had the misfortune and privilege to grow up on both sides of the Atlantic, so I've made this transatlantic crossing as a South African national and now American national. So 3 points, I completely agree with what was said, and thanks, shout out to Jeff. For my sons, I teach in urban planning, and my students have made generous use of your thoughtful relocation of the archive to the Urbana Free Library and not the University Life Student Life. By the way, that record is very, very thin here, and you need to dig a little bit, so I think it's much more secure where you mentioned that. But I want to just make maybe 2 or 3 hopefully coherent points about some of the, I think, blind spots or things that were left out for example, particularly on this question of why now more than ever the issue of international solidarity is so very, very important, which I don't see that consciousness within students, currently. When I got here, we were kind of trying to find out where things are at. I was privileged to meet and then discovered in 2019 the Michael Metz's book on radicals in the heartland, which I highly encourage. That's on the Vietnam protests. In there is a wonderful debate that took place here. It was a national debate, but there was John Lee Johnson, the late John Lee Johnson, and the whole race-class issue came up. Basically, the apartheid on north of University Avenue and south. But again, for them, the Vietnam War wasn't a black thing, right? I mean, basically, they wanted the race question solved, and the students wanted the class issue. That problem still bedevils, I think, for us to rethink that kind of relationships. And of course, you guys are, as I understand it now, in the wake of that 69 movement, right? And so maybe just to add that part in, but the 2019 commemoration has also been archived or documented, I think, somewhere in there. I think maybe also to end off on the question of hope, I mean, as a South African national still involved in the student struggle there, I think if anything more in a comparative study with South Africa, US, and Brazil, which is, I look at Czech settlements for urban dwellers, by and large, the idea of anti-apartheid, if it's going to mean anything, has to now mean anti-capitalism. All right, we have to deal with this Frankenstein monster that capitalism has decided, and we have to deal with all of that. But also to say, and Sister Thierry showed the protests from the Palestinian, and now we've reached levels of genocidal violence as opposed to exploitation. Thanks, and I shared with Jeff that we've My students were able, amongst other things, to put together a comparative exhibition on apartheid in Palestine and the protests, the tents, and that's currently in the Channing Murray Red Herring coffee shop. So if you have a chance, just go and have a look at that. But I think we have to continue to rethink these sort of comparative ideas. In fact, apartheid is very much, again, part of the American. In fact, the Bantustan policy gets learned here from the Native American policy and so forth and so on. But more about that later. One last quick question. From the South African perspective, some of the most radical ideas are emerging from the shack settlements. Not from the political parties, right? Not from the corporations, but from the shack dwellers now. The Abashali Basa in Jundolo is one of the most important movements now. It's rethinking this whole thing. Sadly, they are being assassinated. Right? That's the level of the danger of what is emerging from there. And then also, lastly, before I make one or two quick comments, the xenophobic violence in South Africa that's now raging is very much a kind of Zionist-inspired project, because that is now punishing South Africa for the stance that they took, right, on the Palestine issue. There's a lot of evidence, especially in the Western Cape, to suggest that. But let me just lastly say, in the spirit of commemorations, I was online at a 1976 protest movement, also 50 years later. The student movement is re-engaging. They are reawakening. There's strong solidarity with workers, all right, and particularly university service workers. There was also a South African Communist Party Congress of the Left that took place over just the last 2 days. But anyway, there's also kind of missteps. But lastly, the idea that, and Professor Barnes teaches this book, amongst other things, one of my mentors work on the role of students in struggle. I think that is well worth another read. Again, I mean, these are important lessons, first-person testimony, right, about flashpoints, meaning local flashpoints of global issues. And I think, hopefully, in the archive, we have to emphasize this part of the idea for an internationalist perspective, right, of solidarity as opposed to the kind of charity and outreach. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your comment. Questions, reflections that others may have? Yes, ma'am.
I came to all of this from a longer arc than what was described here. I came in '77, and I had a sister who had gone to Oberlin College, and she had come back with lovely ideas about a future where we could work 4 hours a day, and the rest of the day was ours for doing art. So I came to the UVI with these notions in my head. I was sadly disappointed. Nothing was happening here, hardly. But I did take a class in black and white relations from Unit 1, Allen Hall. And so when you all say Allen Hall, I was trekking all the way across campus trying to get to Allen Hall every day, back and forth. But the black and white relations class got me thinking about these divisions of white and black, and where my identity was. On the campus, I was being identified as a black student because my hair was frizzy, and I had a different kind of speech or something. People were saying, "How are you doing?" I'm like, "How you doing?" I'm doing fine. And other people were saying,
we speak.
and then other people were saying, barely greeting me or something. But so I started finding out that I was being identified as black on campus. And my best friends at the time, because I'd lost my family because they were far away in Rockford, were the North Side folks. I had found people here on campus that were from the North Side, and they were so gentle and friendly. And so my first relations were with people from the North Side. And the campus had a lot of openness then. I've seen the campus change dramatically in the meantime, where even if my partner has the experience of having been stopped repeatedly to show his identity because they suspect he might not be from the campus. So it's become a kind of citadel apartheid here in the course of time that's actually horrific. because there was so much flow then, and I appreciated it because there was cultural exchange that was very needed. So I was looking for activity on campus that was politically inclined, and I remember there was also a taking of the administration building, and we were all there on the floor ready to get arrested, and a student stood up from the music department. I remember from my music classes as well. She said, "If you're going to be arrested, it means you're weak. You have to wait. You have to wait and get stronger, because it's too easy for them to arrest you, you'll be just removed from the university. So organize more, get more following. You're a small group here." So we all got convinced that maybe we should wait and bide our time. In the meantime, the other universities were divesting all over the place, and finally it started happening here. But there were a lot of rallies here for divestiture, and I would watch the Q dogs coming in and dancing their Q dog dance, and the Delta sororities egging them on, and they were disrupting the anti-apartheid. It was school days of Spike Lee all over here. When Spike Lee put out his movie, that's what was happening. But finally, it started, and there were only 2 professors of the whole campus, Crummy and Doyle. Crummy was from the history department, and Doyle was from the law department. Over and over, they spoke along with the student solidarity. I was so appreciative. But in this entire campus, only 2 professors, for me that was appalling. And I realized through my whole experience on this campus how racist this campus is, and it's gotten more racist with time. And the apartheidness of it is mind-boggling. It's horrendous as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, Unit 1 Allen Hall was definitely a source of... I saw a video documentary of the children resisting in South Africa and how they got mowed down by the police. Children. And I realized what apartheid was visually. It was visceral, what happened. And after that, this organization started happening with the Shakedown. Of course I was going to be part of it. Then I heard the 10 people, who are the first 10 who are willing to go in there, because you'll probably get arrested. And I was willing to do it. So the first 10 of us, we were sort of mild, but we knew we had backup. And once if we got carted away, but we didn't, all we did was stand up and interrupt the trustees. We kept on interrupting them and say, what about the divestiture issue? What about and so we were very polite, but they had it because we were disrupting their agenda. But they knew that there was a whole army out there that was going to replace us if we got taken away. So we did get taken away, and they ended up dropping the charges on most of the other folks. But the first 10, we had to get a bunch of lawyers to keep us in the university, because if we didn't get defended so there was, I remember one partner of mine in those first 10, she was terrified, absolutely terrified. She had, and the way they put things on my wrist was a lot looser than what they did to her. She had her circulation cut off, and it was painful. And so she was from Chicago projects, and I was handled differently just because I was lighter, I don't know. But she was, I remember also, she was terrified about the whole situation, getting removed from the university and not have, she had a scholarship, and she was very happy to be able to possibly get a degree in this racist situation. So anyway, I just remember very well that there was a whole lot of ferment on this campus. Oh, and I tried to speak to students who were involved in Black issues, and I talked at the Black lunch and dinner tables. They didn't want to, this isn't our thing, they said. it's not, we didn't start it. I said, why don't you get involved in it? It'll be your thing. They looked like they were very ambitious to get other career paths going. And this wasn't something that would stuff their resume or something like that. So but it looked like there was a schism, a definite schism, and this campus is truly old in its racism. It goes. I finally found out that the Ku Klux Klan had the frat rats going. I mean, I saw them, the frat rats dressed in their frat rat clothes, and then I saw them in Ku Klux Klan outfits. I mean, there were photographs of. I mean, so.
I apologize for cutting you off, but thank you for that. That was actually very insightful. We had another question or comment from the back.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. You sort of revived some of the spirit of the past and got us reflecting. So I was involved in the anti-apartheid movement in Minnesota and also in Melbourne, Australia. And one of the things that was really important in those two places was our connection to African students, local African residents, and connections to the liberation movement. And so I didn't hear anybody mention any of that in your story. So I'm wondering if you had any of that and how it inspired you or impacted your action.
Great question.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we definitely had some really good connections with both African students who were here, right, on campus. But I also think, I was lucky enough to be part of a global youth exchange that went to Zimbabwe, and we had a bunch of South African students come there, and so there were some really good connections there. I don't even know how Vusi came to here. Yeah, so he was on campus here, and really, there's a picture of Vusi back speaking at one of our rallies, and so I think the influence and the cross-pollination of our movements was really important to all of us. I do want to say too, because a couple of your comments have reminded me of part of the struggle and the tension that we were maintaining was a legitimate criticism that we were fighting apartheid so far away, and yet there was racism right here in our backyards, right? And so there was this, even though the DNC was formed to be crystal clear, you kind of talked about that in terms of being focused on divestment from South Africa, it was really important for us to keep grounded in the fact that we needed to fight racism here at home as well.
Yes.
And so I'm segueing from your question, sorry, to something else I wanted to make sure and say. And I think that's true now, today, that we have to make sure and continue to connect our movements. When we're fighting internationally, we also have to make sure and fight here at home and make sure both things happen.
Yes.
Right? It's not going to happen this way. Yeah. But yes, I think the connection that we had to some of the African students who were here was really
So if I can just say, I think it's really important when you tell the story that you mention those connections. Because when we're talking about international solidarity, et cetera, it impacts the way we relate to things, and very few people that sort of reflect on that history make those connections.
very good.
Well, a couple things on that. We did work with the African Student Organization on campus, was pretty strong back then, but they were mostly not South African students. And the few South African students who were here were very hesitant to speak out. So I do know that when Vusi spoke at the rally the night before, he was very cautious because of things that would or could possibly happen. But we did have a strong connection with the African students on campus at that time. And I also want to say that at that time, solidarity movements were a big thing. The Central America Solidarity Movement was big, with whether it was the Sandinistas, with the FMLN, and we were very much conscious of working with the ANC and promoting the struggles of the African National Congress. So I think we're a solidarity movement as well, and saw ourselves as taking direction from that. So I think that was part of it, but not mentioned tonight, but that was definitely part of our struggle.
I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, for I think a lot of us, it's about our memories of what we were doing, and sort of talking about this snapshot of a moment in time. But I want to say a lot of the stuff I learned, and especially from people like Steve Apotheker and others, is the continuity of movements over time. I think as a cultural anthropology student, I think also we just had our heads in the place to recognize the interconnectedness of not just people, but movements and actions and that sort of thing. And I felt very buoyed by our interactions with and our support of our being supported by the people in South Africa who were, you said, taking direction, excuse me, so to speak. So yeah, it's a good thing to remember. And I know we have not a lot.
We have about 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Laura,
Yeah, so I'm just wondering.
can you say your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Stuart Beatty. I was not here in the 1980s, but I was in Minnesota. But I'm just wondering how let's see. So people were pursuing the fight against apartheid in a lot of places, and you were understanding the cause from each other. But I'm wondering if you were also like learning organizing techniques from what other people were doing, or how effective did you have to be? What was effective and what wasn't? How did you learn from each other in the process you used to be effective?
So there was the American Committee on Africa, I believe, that was out of New York. That was a resource that helped be a clearinghouse, and we were definitely plugged into that. So we would get information. So they were trying to gather information about different protests and then put it back out. So we were definitely getting information about that stuff. And then a little bit later, I think there was also the Progressive Student Network, which we worked with, which was also in different campuses, mostly in the Midwest, that were doing anti-apartheid struggles. So yes, we were learning. We were learning, and we were trying to share resources.
But I also think we were learning from the American Civil Rights Movement. I mean, I don't know how I learned a lot of that, whether it was in class or whether it was through my family or what have you, but we had learned already about resistance and civil disobedience, and so that was sort of, I think, part of, that seemed to sort of, I don't want to say come organically, that's not the correct word, but it seemed to be institutional knowledge.
It's just built into the
I mean,
culture.
we recognize,
Yes.
I mean, that then went on.
On TV, we saw it over and over, the images.
Yeah, but also when it went on, then when I came back to town in the 90s and we were doing the anti-racist mascots stuff, so a lot of our information from there, from what we had done earlier, was connected to and sort of brought forward naturally to that, and then that discipline because we did a lot of security stuff. The anti-racist mascots campaign brought a lot of people from the American Indian movement here. But that line was connected, but now I'm interested to sort of think about how did we know that? but for me, it felt sort of very part of who I was, I don't know, as an African American woman, that connection to recognition of civil disobedience and how to conduct oneself in that. I don't know if that's even connected to your.
That's wonderful. I would say two more interactions than I hope.
Hi, I'm Laura, and I was a freshman during that time. In fact, I had a really similar experience where I showed up for the protest at the Union as a freshman, didn't know much, probably knew a lot less than you did, and then the next morning got arrested. And
that's you at the front of the table.
It totally
I
is.
remember that I remember you very well.
Just, and over the course of that night at the Union, I was learning, and there were people to learn from in movie videos and everything. So by the next, it was a great teaching. It worked on me, and by the next morning I was arrested, and my parents saw the photos in the newspaper, and
Yeah.
is that you?
Yeah.
And I think like a week or two later, I became one of the spokespeople. I don't think I was qualified at all. And I was learning as I went, and there were so many mentors like Steve Apotheker who helped teach me, and that was my political awakening as well. I thought I was going to do like pre-med or something, and I ended up studying poli-sci and African studies, and I really learned it sort of became my education. Professors were teaching their classes at the shantytown, and they were doing talks and discussions at the shantytown, and I was waking up to people going to class and around me, and participated in that guerrilla theater thing, which was so incredibly powerful, and that sort of changed everything. And so, and then for me, it allowed me to see the power of experiences outside of the classroom for creating, for our education, and it led me to work at Allen Hall, Unit 1, and become the director of Unit 1. And bring other guests and residents like Prexy Nesbitt and like some of those folks that were... Yeah, we hung George Hallett photos in the guest apartment, and really kind of continuing that education for students about how to figure out who you are and what you value and what your role is in the world. And at the time, I was really, I did some research, and at that time, most students were actually Republicans, like most male students. Female students, like 45% were Republican, and like 54% of male students were Republican. It's not like the anti-apartheid movement was like the majority, right? Like it was a super conservative time. Even more students were just apathetic. And it was the Reagan era. So it was it wasn't necessarily mainstream, but there was the advantage of having this media landscape where people were actually hearing about it in the news, and people were all watching the same news back then. And so, and also it was very face-to-face compared to now. There were no Zoom meetings, there was no signal. Everything was happening in a room with people grappling together with how to make sense of things. And sometimes it was quite contentious, but it was very much a community that developed that shaped us with multi-generational people. Maybe 34 is a different generation, right? But there were lots of older folks too. But it was face to face, and it was sitting after meetings and hashing things out and figuring it out. And so, and it was called having phone trees. Yeah, it was having phone trees. It was physical flyers. So it in a way it's easier now, but in a way it's also so much
more distant.
Yeah.
It's more efficient, but less connected.
Yeah. So just some thoughts.
Thank you.